Well, first of all, here's the Quiz Bowl teams for high school.
Now we can't see it.
Now you can't see one of them. Now you can't see both of them. Okay, science time. Shh. Science time. Today we're talking about relationships between genes and traits. Genes and traits. There, that looks great. Genes and traits. What am I going to do first? You already know. You've taken enough notes in here. You've taken the fewest notes in here of anyone in this building except for the 7th graders, but you already know what I'm going to do first. What is it? Define genes and traits, which is something that we should have done in our bell work, except for some of us really slacked off on that. But what's a gene? Someone knows the definition of a gene. I know that 5 people know that genes existed because those people at least listed the word gene among their vocabulary words. I know that at least 2 people can define gene. What's a gene? Raise your hand if you know. Ugh. Everyone who knows what a gene is, raise your hand. I'm going to call on one of you. Ugh. Kendall, what's a gene?
A gene is like something you could get from your ancestors that kind of define your traits.
Yes, okay, it's something you can get from your ancestors that kind of defines your traits. True, but what is the something? It's a what? What physical thing is a gene? Gunnar is going to have an aneurysm if we don't call on him what?
A gene is like the color of your hair,
Okay.
the color of your skin.
Genes code for the color of your hair and the color of your skin.
Yes.
Chloe, what is it? What is a gene?
Things
It's a what?
that are on your legs.
The something. Kendall was not wrong. It's just that we need to define the something that she used in her
That's
definition.
passed down from
DNA.
You use the word something again. It's something that's passed down from our ancestors, sure, but what is the something?
traits.
Yes, Gunnar said it actually. Well, were you going to say what Gunnar said? What were you going to say? What is the something that's passed down from your ancestors?
I was gonna say DNA.
Yes, DNA is what I'm looking for. So genes are a segment of DNA. I'm surprised that was as much of a struggle as it was, but it lets me know that 1, you should probably read your explorations better, and 2, you should be writing this down right now. I'm sure that some people in here already knew this. In fact, I know that there are people who already knew this because they defined it in the bell work, but you should still write this down. A segment of DNA that, I'm going to use the verb codes for a specific trait. And let's talk about what up with DNA. Well, okay, what is DNA? Does anyone know what DNA stands for? It's obviously an initialism. DNA is an initialism. What does it stand for? I don't even know if it's in here.
Dinosaurs.
No, but we are going to write it down. Ready? Deoxy.
Deoxy.
It's all one word, so I'm going to hyphenate because I kind of ran out of room. Ribonucleic. And then the word acid is another word, a separate word. Deoxyribonucleic is all one word, acid. So deoxyribonucleic acid.
Oh, it's ribo. I thought it was ribo.
It is ribo.
Bo.
Bo. As in bunny. Deoxyribonucleic acid is what it is. So and this is a component of what? Where is this?
Inside our bodies.
We didn't say in our genes.
Not in our genes, in our
I mean, it's in your genes.
Our legs.
what's it called?
yes, in your legs. Come on, homies. Where does this exist?
And your cells.
In your cells. Specifically, where in your cells? Well, mitochondria do have DNA, but what? Yes. Shh. Located in the nucleus of a cell. It isn't. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. So you don't even know the meme. Okay, you gotta stop saying these inane things while we're trying to have a discussion here. Okay, so a gene is a segment of DNA that codes for a specific trait. DNA is short for deoxyribonucleic acid, and all of this exists in the cell, specifically in the nucleus. As you can see, the nucleus, or in the diagram, as you can see in the diagram, that the nucleus is full of chromosomes, which is what we call bundles of DNA, and then this individual little segments of the DNA, there's gajillions, that's not even a real number. There are literally trillions or billions or even quadrillions of DNA segments in a chromosome, and there are 23 chromosomes in your body, and each of these DNAs has some Some of them don't code for anything that we can tell, but all of them are there for a reason. And when I say that they code for a specific trait, what does that mean that happens? The DNA does what? You should know this from Mr. O's class. What's the DNA do?
Makes us.
Okay, no, you're not made of DNA. There's actually, by mass, there's not a whole lot of you is DNA. You're not made of DNA. You're not a pile of DNA walking around like a... Yes, but what does it do? It codes for, and what do I mean by that? It codes for a specific trait. It, what? What's DNA's job? What's the first thing it does? When DNA is, well, I should have asked Mr. O about this. I think translated. It does what? Fate.
The DNA codes for your skeletal system, your muscle tissue.
All of that eventually, all the large scale structures in your body, but first, and when we get right down to the nitty gritty, the DNA codes for certain amino acids. So DNA decides which amino acids are built by the cell. Instructions for amino acids. And then those amino acids, like your little lab yesterday, the amino acids, of which there are only, and I should have asked Mr. O this too, there are only a certain number of amino acids. 20-some? Carson, run and go ask Mr. O how many amino acids there are. He'll know. 20. There are 20. Sorry, sit down. It says about 20. There are about 20 different kinds of amino acids. And there are about 20 different kinds of amino acids. There are about 20 different kinds of amino acids. And it's not just the kinds of amino acid that work together to build a protein, but also how they're folded. So you had in your lab yesterday a sheet of paper, right? And it had different colored dots. These are all going to be purple, but pretend they're different colors. Oh yeah, does someone still have those that I can show the camera?
Chloe.
Just Chloe. Is Chloe the only person who kept them? And she flattens out? That's okay. We had different pieces of paper, and then the way the paper was folded made different shapes, right? Kind of the same thing with amino acids. So the genes tell what kind of amino acids are built, and the building of the amino acids causes different patterns of folding, and over a large scale, so let me erase this. So we could have, maybe the simple protein is one sheet of amino acids. Amino acids. And then on the large scale, it starts to get folded up and mixed with other amino acid structures. And eventually we get extremely large things called proteins. And the proteins are like the living part of you. They make your cells up. Right, cells are also made of water and lipids. But the proteins are the part that we would consider to be the living thing. This, remember from our video, the amino acids turning into proteins is where they kind of decide this is where life began, is because life codes for proteins. That's an evidence of life. Amino acids even can exist outside of living things. Amino acids can be synthesized by human beings. They can somewhat infrequently, but sometimes exist as naturally occurring compounds that aren't made by living things. But proteins, the way that these complicated amino acids are folded, never exist unless there's life. Building block of all life. Genes are the instructions for this, but these are the building blocks for all life. You can kind of think, I'll give you two analogies. You can kind of think of DNA is like the Lego instruction manual that comes with a kit of Legos. And then amino acids are like the individual Lego bricks. And then a protein would be like the Lego set when it's all the way built. Okay? Or maybe we can think of it like genes, DNA, is like letters in the alphabet. And then words built out of those letters. And then a book, Harry Potter, Cosmopolitan 2015 edition, December. Any text, no matter how different it is made of the same words that are made of the same letters. So even though there are only 26 letters, there are millions of words in the English language, and there are almost infinite ways, probably literally infinite ways they can be combined to form different documents. Okay, so that's, you see the kind of the two analogies I've made? Once again, with the Legos, instruction manual, the Legos themselves, and even though this certain protein, if we follow the instructions, there are a million different other ways those Lego bricks could be combined to form a different protein. Will?
How come there's only 20 when there's been amino acids for billions of years?
Yes. Do you say how come there have been?
There's only,
Oh, how come there are only 20 amino acids? Well, it has to do eventually, we get down to, if we focus in on biology enough, which is the study of life, we get into chemistry. And because of the way the chemical elements are and the way they can combine, there only are 20 useful amino acids that are used for building proteins. And I don't know, it might be that there's more than 20. I don't know how many there actually are. Your book says approximately 20. Mr. O would know. Yes, Gabe.
I know it doesn't really have to do much with this, but since there have only been like 27 generations of the modern human.
And I don't know whether that's true or not, but let's assume that it is. Go on.
That saying is true. That means theoretically there is a ancestor of every single human being on Earth in like the 1100s.
Yeah, we've already talked about this though. In the last video. Maybe you weren't here, but that's okay. Yeah, there is, all people have a common ancestor, certainly. And maybe it was as recent as the 1100s, but I would be surprised by that because I know that by the 1100s there were already, for instance, different races of people. And like Genghis Khan was before the 1100s, and maybe one of the funny things about the internet is people say, you have this % likelihood of being related to Genghis Khan because he had so many offspring. You know what I mean? But anyway, let's get back to this. So how does this... You have a problem? Good. Okay, let's get back to this. So these genes, they code for proteins, but how does this end up looking on a whole organism, cellular organism? What do the proteins end up manifesting as? There's your word, Hunter. What do the proteins end up manifesting? How do the proteins, which are the same in Aaron and Kimber and Ethan, end up making it so they look differently and behave differently and exist differently? They have the same number of toes, probably. I don't actually know. But I assume you all have the same number of toes as each other. So what do we call the things that these piles of proteins, as proteins build up to make a Lego town, for example, in that analogy, or a series of books? What do they do? Traits. Genetic traits, exactly. Remember, not all traits are genetic traits. Gabe's ridiculous nose ring is a trait, but it's not a genetic trait. I'm just kidding, Gabe. I like your nose ring. But genetic traits are those that are coded for by genes. What is an example of a genetic trait? Two people raise your hands and give me an example of a genetic trait and a non-example. So that is an example of something that is a genetic trait and then an example of something but not a genetic trait. Kendall.
A genetic trait is like the color of your hair, and then a trait is like what you're wearing.
Yeah, okay. A genetic trait would be like your hair color, and a non-genetic trait would be like what you choose to wear that day. Kimber.
Your eye color would be a genetic trait, and then just when you dye your hair, it would.
Okay, yeah, so your eye color or your hair color are a genetic trait, and if you dye your hair, not a genetic one, because that's something you've chosen that is not coded for in your genes. One more, Haley. You have a question, Kesslin?
Yeah.
Okay, one.
The way how somebody looks is in the genetic trait, and say what people wear is a
Okay.
trait.
So your bodily appearance could be, to some extent, a genetic trait. Is everything about your body, even if you're not wearing clothes or having hair dyed or anything like that, is everything about your body a genetic trait?
No.
Okay. Yeah, right, because imagine if I had a twin, or maybe if somehow I was cloned, do you think that person would necessarily have the same exact, for instance, amount of disgusting body fat around their middle as I do? Probably not, because that's a factor of what? Of my environment. I've chosen to eat literally thousands of Big Macs every day for my entire life, and that's why I look like this. Beef and cheddar. Exactly. That's why people call me beef and cheddar. But the reason some of people or human beings or any organism's appearance is due to its environment, and those are the non-genetic traits. But then genetic traits are things coded for in their genes. Can I pass down? Well, is my son going to have the same body fat percentage as me?
No.
Maybe, but probably not, because that's an environmental trait. What about someone's dad? Maybe several people in this building's dad ain't got part of one of their fingers. Is that going to be passed on to their children? No, because that has been severed. I mean, it's an environmental thing that isn't going to be passed on.
Born without said finger.
And some people are born with maybe, for instance, 6 fingers on one hand, and that probably could be passed on to their offspring. Yes, Kesslin, you've had a question for a while. What is it?
My question was,
Shh, listen to Kesslin's question.
say there was a British guy and like an American lady, right? Say, so British guy has an accent, but
Yes.
the American lady doesn't.
Are you asking me if an accent is a genetic trait or not?
No, I don't know.
An accent is a non-genetic trait. In fact, language altogether is a non-genetic
But
trait.
what about like, then
then how come you're about to ask? Then how come the child has like a weird fusion of an American and an English accent, right?
No, well, then how do British people get their accents?
Oh, because they learned it from their parents who also had an accent, and they learned from their parents who also had an
But-
accent. It's not genetic. It's just they were
But
raised.
They learn English, so why can't they have an English accent?
That's how we learn to talk.
Yeah, that's just the way they learn to talk from their parents. Most people are raised by their parents, and so there's an overlap between. Even non-genetic traits can be passed down, but that has to be through behavior. Fate, one last thing, and then we have to move on.
So you said that we can synthesize amino acids,
Mm-hmm.
but since we can synthesize amino acids, does that mean that those 20 amino acids are all natural amino acids
Mhm.
or the synthesized?
I think this is all the natural ones. And once again, I don't know the exact number, and maybe there are some other things called amino acids that can be synthesized that aren't made in living organisms. I just don't know. Look it up and let me know, okay? Okay, last thing we're going to talk about before we're done here. What happens, remember nucleic acid is all that's coded for in the gene, right? So there are 4 nucleic acids in DNA, cytosine, guanine, thymine, and adenosine or adenine. I can't remember the one or the other. There are only 4 different nucleic acids that are in this, and you can see your book repeatedly labels them A, B, or A, G, T, and C. And one pairs with the other, and this codes for an amino acid eventually. But what happens if something causes one of these pairs to be changed somehow, or removed, or broken? What do we call that? Do you remember? A mutation. A mutation. And mutations can be one of 3 things. What are the 3 things that a mutation can end up as? Will?
Adding.
Okay, so there can be additive mutations, but I'm talking about the effects of the mutation. Ethan?
Cancer.
Okay, yes, cancer can be because of a mutation, but that's not. That's too specific for this list. Aaron, what are the 3?
Neutral, beneficial, and harmful.
Neutral, beneficial, and harmful. Let's start with harmful. Cancer, which was brought up, is an example of a harmful mutation. That makes the organism less likely to survive. And we're talking about a multi-celled organism here. If you had a single-celled organism and a mutation occurred in its genetic sequence, what would probably happen to that organism? Yeah, if it's single-cell, it's just gone. It just died, and it doesn't pass that mutation on to its offspring. So that would kill it. Or if it's in a multi-celled organism, usually either that cell will die or the other cells around it will kill it so that it doesn't kill the whole organism. But not always, and that's where cancer comes from. Let's skip beneficial for now. How would a neutral mutation affect an organism's ability to survive? Yeah. Fate?
Symbiosis.
No, that's not a mutation at all. Okay.
So the color of your hair.
No, I'm not asking you for your questions. I'm saying not an example. How would a neutral mutation affect the organism's ability to survive? By definition.
It wouldn't.
It wouldn't.
because It's neutral.
Yeah, it wouldn't affect its ability to survive. So this may or may not be passed on. Maybe the neutral gets passed on, and maybe eventually the neutral becomes harmful or beneficial depending on what that mutation was. And then how will the beneficial affect it?
The last one, harmful.
Harmful, yep. How will the beneficial mutation affect the organism? Yes?
It will help it.
Yeah, it'll probably help it in its environment, and therefore it'll be more likely to pass that on. So generally, the beneficial mutations get passed on to offspring. Passed to offspring, not always. Especially since there's such a thing now as what we call artificial selection, where human beings can pick the traits. For instance, if you're a rancher, or sometime in the past a rancher has bred cows that would be beneficial to human beings, but that's probably not beneficial to that organism, right? A lot of its natural defenses have been removed from its non-human bred ancestor. But in theory, at least, the natural selection involves the passing on of beneficial traits to offspring. Harmful traits get removed because that offspring either dies immediately or at least is unable to reproduce, and so it doesn't get passed on. But beneficial ones do get passed on, and we call this idea, the passing on of beneficial traits, what? It was one of your other vocab words that several people listed but did not define. Yeah, adaptation. Adaptation, and then on the large scale, someone who did define them, I think it was Will, adaptation on the large scale, when that occurs over a long period of time, leads to what? Evolution. Good. And that's how that relates back to what we've already talked about and what we will talk about more in the future. Do you have questions about how any of this works together?
No,
Does this fit in with what you had read in your explorations? Because you did those before. Was this a good way for you to do it? Was to do the explorations before? I heard Hadley's opinion. What is everyone else's? You like doing the explorations before and then having the lesson after?
Yes.
In my mind, what this does is help you summarize what you should have learned from your explorations. This is the key points. Is this adaptations? No. I would say this is probably 60 or 70% worth of your quiz. If you're only going to listen to me talk about this stuff, I would expect a 60 or 70% on your quiz. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you should have also read this. Is it fair for part of the burden of your education to be on you?
Yeah.
Someone's going to say, oh, Mr. Kime didn't teach me this. But you have to learn on your own too, babies, you know.